We seek validation from others the further we drift from ourselves. Since the dawn of civilization, man has constructed elaborate masks, not to protect himself from the external world, but to escape the inevitable encounter with himself. But what if I told you that this flight has a name, a precise anatomy, and was deciphered by one of history's most penetrating minds? Sigmund Freud understood something most prefer to ignore. Our compulsive need for attention is not vanity, it is terror. Terror of the void we encounter when external noise ceases and we are forced to look within. Freud unraveled that we live in constant flight from our own psyche, constructing an entire existence based on others' recognition to avoid confronting what we truly are. You know this feeling, the discomfort when you're alone too long, the need to check your phone, to post something, to be seen, commented on, validated. This isn't social connection. It's a drug to anesthetize the fear of yourself. Over the next few minutes, we won't merely diagnose this behavior. We'll dive into the cartography of the human mind mapped by Freud and extract a precise guide to how you became hostage to others' approval. More importantly, how to break these invisible chains. Prepare yourself, for the knowledge you're about to receive will expose truths about your psyche that few have the courage to face. The law of the inverted mirror. First Freudian law of attention. The more you seek your identity in others' gaze, the more you lose access to your true nature. Freud discovered that the human ego is a fragile construction, constantly threatened by pressure from the id, our primitive impulses, and the superego, society's moral demands. When we cannot integrate these internal forces, we project our identity outward like an inverted mirror. We seek in others what we cannot find in ourselves: approval, purpose, worth. This is the trap. The ego, hungry for external validation, becomes increasingly dependent, like an addict who needs growing doses to feel the same effect. Consider the clinical case Freud documented of a young Viennese aristocrat in 1895. Let's call her Helena. Helena lived obsessed with social approval, completely changing her personality depending on whom she was with. With intellectuals, she became erudite. With bohemians, rebellious. With family, submissive. During months of analysis, Freud discovered that Helena wasn't afraid of social rejection. She was terrified of discovering that beneath all these masks, perhaps there was no one there. Her frantic search for attention was a smokescreen to avoid encountering inner emptiness. When she finally confronted this truth, Helena had a nervous breakdown. But it was also the beginning of her cure. Today, Helena would be a digital influencer. Observe how social media has become the perfect laboratory for this Freudian pathology. Each post is an attempt to construct an external identity. Each like, a temporary fix of validation. Each period, without notifications, an unbearable confrontation with inner silence. First arsenal. Implement daily periods of validation fasting. 1 hour per day without social media, without seeking approval. Observe the anxiety that arises. That's your true nature trying to emerge. Second, stop modulating your opinion based on others' reactions. Express a genuine idea and stand firm, regardless of the response. The law of defensive projection. Second law. You criticize in others what you most fear to recognize in yourself. Freud identified projection as one of the psyche's most primitive defense mechanisms. When a truth about ourselves is unbearable, the mind exiles it to the external world. One who compulsively seeks attention often become the fiercest critic of the exhibitionists around them. It's an ingenious way to keep one's own need in the unconscious. In ancient Rome, Senator Marcus Crassus was known for his inflammatory rhetoric against vain politicians who sought popular applause. Ironically, Crassus spent fortunes on public spectacles and grand festivals, always ensuring his name was associated with each event. Historians report that Crassus spent hours rehearsing spontaneous speeches and planted admirers in crowds to initiate applause. His criticism of others was, in fact, a projection of his own obsession with attention, a way to keep this unbearable truth away from his consciousness. Observe the phenomenon of people who hate drama, but are always at the center of conflicts, or those who criticize the narcissistic generation while documenting every aspect of their own lives. Criticism becomes psychological smokescreen. First, identify your most frequent criticisms of others. Ask yourself, to what extent does this apply to me? Second, when you feel the impulse to judge someone, pause and investigate what aspect of yourself is being threatened by this observation. The law of productive emptiness. Third law. Silence and solitude are not enemies to be avoided, but portals to genuine self-knowledge. Freud observed that modern neurosis arises largely from the inability to tolerate emptiness. What we call boredom or loneliness is actually the moment when the psyche tries to communicate with us. But our society has taught us to fill every second with external stimuli, cutting this vital communication. Philosopher Blaise Pascal spent years studying mathematics and physics, but it was during a period of forced retreat due to illness that he had his most profound revelations. Isolated, without the usual academic applause, Pascal confronted what he called the eternal silence of infinite spaces. Initially, this experience terrified him. But gradually, Pascal discovered that emptiness wasn't absence. It was presence, the presence of his true nature, uncontaminated by external expectations. It was in this silence that his thoughts were born, one of the most profound works on the human condition. We live in the era of the attention economy, where silence has become a rare luxury. Every moment of pause is immediately filled with podcasts, music, notifications. We've lost the ability to simply be without needing to appear. First, institute meetings with yourself. 20 minutes daily without any external stimulus. No music, no reading, no phone. Just you and your thoughts. Second, practice what Freud called floating attention. Observe your thoughts without judging or redirecting them. The law of the transparent mask. Fourth law. The more elaborate your public persona, the more obvious becomes what you're trying to hide. Freud identified that the unconscious always finds ways to express itself, even through our attempts at concealment. The persona, the social mask we construct, invariably reveals what it intends to hide. It's as if the psyche had a compulsion to honesty that sabotages our most elaborate disguises. Louis XIV, the Sun King, transformed Versailles into history's greatest spectacle of power. Every gesture was choreographed, every public appearance calculated to project omnipotence. But intimate letters reveal a man consumed by insecurity, obsessed with courtiers' opinions, incapable of making a decision without consulting multiple advisors. The very excess of the performance denounced the inner void. The more grandiose the power performance, the more evident his psychological fragility became. Freud would say that Louis XIV was screaming his insecurity through every golden ornament of Versailles. Observe how people who constantly post about living their best life are often going through their most difficult moments, or how those who preach incessantly about authenticity are the most calculating in their public appearances. First, examine your own overcompensations. In what areas do you most insist on projecting competence? There probably lies your greatest insecurity. Second, practice a strategic vulnerability. Share a real weakness occasionally. Paradoxically, this will increase your credibility. So far, we've established the fundamental pillars of Freudian psychology of attention. You've learned that your search for validation is a flight from yourself, that you criticize in others what you fear in yourself, that emptiness is your ally, not your enemy, and that your most elaborate masks reveal exactly what they intend to hide. But this is just the diagnosis. Now we're entering the territory of transformation. The next laws are not for the faint of heart. They teach how to convert your fear of yourself into genuine power, how to transform the need for attention into authentic presence. Prepare yourself, for we're about to enter the deepest and most disturbing aspects of the human mind. The law of libidinal inversion. Fifth advanced law. The energy you spend seeking attention can be redirected to create something worthy of genuine attention. Freud discovered that libido, psychic vital force, is limited but malleable. The energy we waste in empty performances seeking validation is the same we could channel into creation, discovery, real growth. It's the Freudian concept of sublimation, transforming primitive impulses into higher achievements. Leonardo da Vinci was notoriously introverted and frequently criticized by his contemporaries as odd and antisocial. While other Renaissance artists competed for patrons' favor through flattery and politics, Leonardo isolated himself in his studies. But observe the result. While the sociable ones were forgotten by history, Leonardo channeled all his psychic energy into observation, experimentation, and creation. His notebooks reveal a man who converted solitude into genius. He didn't seek attention. He created works that naturally attracted it. Today, we see this dynamic and genuine content creators versus empty influencers. Some spend energy trying to go viral. Others focus on mastering their craft. Who do you think builds lasting legacies? First, do an energy audit. List how much daily time you spend seeking validation versus creating something of value. Second, implement the creation first rule. Before checking any social media, produce something. Write, draw, solve a problem, learn a skill. The law of symbolic death. Sixth law. You must symbolically kill the version of yourself that needs constant approval to be reborn as someone complete. Freud observed that all genuine psychological growth involves a form of death, the death of old patterns, limiting identities, infantile needs. The person who compulsively seeks attention is trapped in a developmental stage where they still need parental validation. Healing requires a symbolic death of this needy inner child. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius inherited absolute power at 40. He could have lived intoxicated by infinite applause and adulation. Instead, he chose a different path. In his Meditations, Marcus Aurelius documented a process of voluntary death of his imperial ego. Every morning, he contemplated his own mortality and the futility of seeking approval. Remember, he wrote, that soon both you and those who admire you will be dead, and your names will be forgotten. This practice of symbolic death freed him from the need to impress, transforming him into history's most respected emperor-philosopher. Think of figures like Steve Jobs in his final years, or Johnny Cash in his final recordings. Men who went through the symbolic death of their previous personas and emerged with hauntingly powerful authenticity. First, practice contemplation of impermanence. Daily, remember that all approval is temporary. All criticism is passing. Second, identify an old version of yourself you need to kill. Perhaps the youth who needed to impress parents, or the professional who seeks constant validation from the boss. The law of magnetic presence. Seventh law. True presence doesn't seek attention. It naturally attracts it through inner completeness. Freud noted that psychologically integrated people exert an almost magnetic attraction, not because they perform, but because they radiate a rare quality, peace with themselves. They don't need to prove anything because they have nothing to hide. This authenticity is so scarce, it automatically becomes fascinating. Jung reported about his first meeting with Freud in 1907. When Freud entered the room, Jung wrote, there was no fanfare, no performance. He was simply present, completely present. It was as if all his attention was simultaneously turned inward and outward. We talked for 13 straight hours, and I felt I was in the presence of someone who didn't need to prove who he was. Jung observed that Freud had a quality he called psychological gravity, like a planet that attracts other objects not by effort, but by its own mass. This is the difference between performative charisma and authentic presence. Observe true leaders versus stage leaders. The former command attention through depth, not volume. Thinkers like Jordan Peterson or figures like Elon Musk. Controversial, but magnetically present, because they're not trying to impress anyone. First, practice total presence in conversations. Instead of planning your next impressive line, genuinely listen. Second, develop depth in one area. Become so competent at something that your confidence becomes natural, not performative. The law of final freedom. Eighth supreme law. The greatest human freedom is not needing to be perceived in any way to know who you are. This is the culmination of Freudian thought on psychological autonomy. When you no longer need external validation to confirm your identity. When you can exist completely alone without anxiety. When your opinions don't fluctuate based on others' approval. There, you've achieved what Freud considered complete psychological maturity. In his final years, facing jaw cancer and forced exile by the Nazis, Freud reached this state. His final letters reveal a man in total peace with himself. I no longer care, he wrote, whether they agree with my theories. They are true or they are not. My need for approval has died, and with it, my need to defend myself. Freud had reached what he considered the apex of psychological evolution, the ability to exist independently of others' gaze, not from arrogance, but from inner completeness. Think of figures like Cormac McCarthy, who rarely gives interviews, or Banksy, who maintains total anonymity. They've created powerful works without needing constant personal validation. Their freedom from the need for attention freed them to create without filters. First, practice anonymous acts of courage. Do something good without anyone knowing it was you. Second, develop a core identity, values and beliefs that remain constant regardless of who's watching. We've traveled today through the complete cartography of the human mind traced by Freud regarding our compulsion for attention. We discovered that we seek external validation because we fear the encounter with ourselves. We learned that we project onto others what we can't bear to recognize in ourselves, that emptiness is a portal to self-knowledge, and that our most elaborate masks reveal exactly what they try to hide. In the advanced tactics, we saw how to convert this energy into genuine creation, how to symbolically kill old versions of ourselves, how to develop magnetic presence through inner completeness, and finally, how to achieve the supreme freedom of existing independently of others' gaze. Together, these 8 laws form a complete system of psychological liberation, a map to exit the prison of validation dependency and enter the territory of true autonomy. This knowledge I've shared with you today is a double-edged blade. It can be used to build a life of genuine meaning, or to manipulate others who are still trapped in this need for attention. The choice, as always, rests in your hands. Freud taught us that the goal of analysis is not to eliminate suffering, it's to transform neurotic suffering into the common suffering of life. Use this knowledge to free yourself, to elevate yourself, to find your true nature, but never to exploit others' psychological fragility. Remember, those who truly don't need attention also don't need to prove they don't need it. In the comments, share which of these 8 laws resonates most deeply with your personal experience and why. This reflection is part of the self-knowledge process we initiated today. If this journey through the human mind awakened something in you, subscribe to the channel. We'll continue unveiling the deepest secrets of psychology, philosophy, and human nature. Your like isn't just approval, it's recognition that this knowledge has transformative value. It's a way of saying you're ready to abandon the compulsive need for validation and embrace the freedom of being genuinely yourself. Fear of yourself is the last obstacle between you and your true nature. Now you have the tools to cross it. The question is, will you have the courage to use them?